On this week's episode, I'm joined by Oliver Balch. Oliver is an author and a journalist originally from the UK, but his home is right here in Portugal. We discuss, amongst other things, some of the places where Oliver loves to run and explore in Portugal, how places off the beaten track have truly surprised him, and why Portugal is a place where Oliver feels like he belongs. Welcome back, or welcome to another episode of Portugal, The Simple Life, and I'm delighted to be joined here by Oliver Balch. Oliver, thank you for joining us. How are you?
No problem. No, I'm great, thanks. Yeah, really good.
Wonderful. You were saying off just before we started that you had a bit of an interesting weekend, first Portuguese wedding.
That's right.
How did that go? Give people a little insider into a good old Portuguese wedding, because they're a different animal to a lot of other places.
They are indeed. I mean, this is my first experience, but I did do a bit of asking around beforehand to just find out what I might be in store for. And they are long, man. So we got there at 12 midday, and we left at 1:30 in the morning. And basically, it's food, drink. Bit more food, bit of drink, maybe a bit of dancing, and back to the drink, more food, more drink. But it was great. It was really nice. Because I knew that, I managed to, pace myself. And everyone was quite well behaved. I'm from Britain, and I think an English wedding that was like, people would have blown a gasket by like 5 o'clock in the afternoon, in the ditch by 6. So I was quite impressed that people were still standing at midnight when they cut the cake. But it was great. It was lovely.
Yeah, they tend to pace themselves a little bit better.
I think they do.
And the amount of food involved helps as well.
That definitely helps. I think there were 6 courses, maybe 7, but they sort of began to merge into one after. I wasn't sure we were having lunch or dinner or what was going on.
Sounds about right.
It's nice because I think the Portuguese are quite quiet and moderate. I find, the ones I know, and a wedding is a good occasion to sort of let rip a bit, and you can see the other more sort of joyful side of them. So that was great, and the romantic side as well. This couple, they were quite young, and they were so in love, and it was just a beautiful day, and the sun was out, and it was a bit, for me as a Brit, it was a bit cheesy, but kind of cheesy in a nice way.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, my first Portuguese wedding was a good 8 years ago that I was invited to one, and they're great. They're probably the best weddings I've been to. A lot long, yeah, and I didn't expect it to go on for that long. That was a shocker for me as well the first time. So yeah. But sorry, Oliver, maybe you can start just by telling us a little bit about you.
Yeah, sure. So I'm British. A dad of 2. I've got 2 boys who came here to Portugal with us almost 4 years ago now. They're now 12 and 11, and I work as a journalist and as a writer. My background's in research, writing, journalism, and we live in Porto, in the north of Portugal, the second city. We've been here since, a few months after Brexit, that small vote we had where my homeland decided it would be going its own way, and we decided that we wanted to stick with Europe, and so we moved in 2017. Yeah.
Well, okay. I mean, well, let's take a step back. I mean, was this when you moved? It wasn't your first time visiting Portugal, right?
No, it was the first time. I'd never been to Portugal when we moved.
Wow. Okay. So, I mean, how did you get to that decision?
It's slightly convoluted. As a family, we all had our different motivations. So I had we'd lived in Argentina for a long time, South America. Okay. Been there 7 years. And I came back and started a PhD program in Latin American studies and anthropology. And I felt if I wanted to pitch myself as a Latin Americanist, then I'd need Portuguese as well as Spanish. So I had good Spanish from Argentina. I wanted to learn Portuguese, and Brazil suddenly felt quite a long way away. We've still got, my parents aren't that elderly, but they're not getting any younger. And my brother and sister both got kids. We wanted cousins, to know each other. So Portugal, for me, felt like a good sort of interim bridge between the UK and South America. And my kids, they didn't have much choice, to be fair. But I did say, it would benefit them in the long run to be bilingual, to have a second language, to experience what it is to be European, and have the flexibility when they're older with a European passport to study and work in Europe as well. And my wife just loved it. She came on holiday with some girlfriends to Porto, stayed with this lovely guy who became a really good friend of ours, had a small boutique hotel, Spanish, French, but has lived in Portugal for 10, 15 years. And she only came for the weekend, basically came back and said, right, wait, I think we're moving to Portugal. And then, I mentioned Brexit before, that was part of the reason. We thought it would just be time. So we came for 6 months, and we extended it for a year, and extended it for another year. And then once you're in the system, and once you've been here for a while, you think, why go back? And UK's in a bit of a sort of, let's say, transitional space right now. And so we thought, let's stick it here. We did the same to Argentina. We went for a year, we extended it by a year, and we stayed for 7. So, we're putting down roots.
Yeah, interesting. What do you? I mean, are you living in Porto itself, right in the city?
Yeah. So we're living in an area called Francos, which is it's fairly central. So we were living dead in the center. We rented a place through Airbnb, like a lot of new arrivals do, and we liked it. So we asked the guy if we could just extend it, and we ended up staying a year and a half, I think, in this one flat right in the middle near Trinidad, which is the sort of hub for the metro system. Porto's got a great metro system. I'm a big fan of public transport. I go around, I use the metro a lot. I don't use the bus so much because I tend to use my bike, and you can get the bike on the metro and off the metro, and I can cycle around. So Trinidad is the hub. It's at the top of Avenida Aliados, which is the kind of main thoroughfare of the city. And we loved it there. Everything was close by, the shops, the Rio Douro, the Douro River, which is a landmark in the city, divides Porto from the south from Villanova de Gaia. But I also felt a bit like a tourist. There's loads of Airbnbs. There's every cafe has an English menu, and whilst it's great, especially to begin with, we could sort of find our way around quite easily. After a while, I felt, no, I want to go and live where other Portuguese people live, and not where weekend holiday makers stay. And to have a local butcher that knew my name, or a local cafe that recognised who I was and knew my order. So we moved to this place called Francos, which is, I joke of it's a mix of either old grannies or drug dealers. But there aren't that many drug dealers, but it's up and coming area, let's say. But it does feel authentic, and it's, I'm 10 minutes from the centre, and 20 minutes from the airport, and 15 minutes from the beach. So it's perfect. You can get in and out of the city.
Yeah. It's a great city. A lot of people know it's the sort of the birthplace of Portugal, and it's got all that history. It's got a long history between the British as well and the Portuguese. A lot of your port houses, there's a cricket club there, things like that. But I mean, is there something that you think that people should know about Porto and that area that perhaps they don't know?
It's a good question, and it's obviously difficult to second guess what people know and what they don't know. It has got a delightful historical centre which references all the things that you were talking about. So the cathedral and the old city walls, and then the port wine houses on the other side of the river, and the British connection there. And it's super popular for short haul city visits for a long weekend. I think it's one European destination 3 of the last 4 years or something like that. Only because people got sick of going to not sick of going to Lisbon. Once been to Lisbon a couple of times on the city break, looking for another one, and Porto does the job. And it did have pre-pandemic lots of cheap flights around Europe and back to the UK, especially. So that's the kind of Porto that most people know and recognise. And what I was surprised by was how much other stuff was going on in the city. So there were some really up and coming neighbourhoods. There's some still gritty neighbourhoods. There's the sort of Foz area out on the Atlantic coast, which is still part of the city, although it sort of feels slightly separate. And so discovering all these other parts of the city was what surprised me. And in terms of the culture of the place, I was surprised and delighted by how uncommercial the city is. Coming from a kind of fairly advanced retail environment like the British High Street and the supermarkets, and it's just like buy, come into our shop, buy this, advertising, it's all flash, and you just like feel like a consumer in London or other UK cities. And here it's like people feel indifferent whether you go into their shop or not. You have to queue for ages in the supermarket, so you're disincentivized from going. And Christmas came and went, and didn't even realize, there was a beautiful like Christmas tree on the main avenue, but none of that hard push sell by, and it felt, I love that. I love the fact that it feels in a way a bit like the 1970s, that we're citizens first and consumers second. And I think places like the US and the UK maybe got that the wrong way round at the moment.
Yeah, that's interesting. And what about for your boys? I mean, have they settled, or have they learned the language, or how are they enjoying being here?
Well, we moved at a really good time, I think, for them. So they were born in Argentina. Okay. We lived in India. We took them to India when they were young. I did a book about India. So that I think we were 5 months and 18 months old when we went to India for a year. We took them to Uruguay for 6 months for my PhD research. Lived in Wales for 5 years. So they're used to moving around lots. They're pretty flexible. And we want that to be part of their identity. But Portugal, they moved, they were 8 and 9, so it's a really good age to move, I think. And we dumped them in we did just dump them in a local school. Our flight was delayed from the UK because there was a storm. So we arrived at 1 a.m. in the morning, I remember, and next day, 9 a.m., they were in school, not without one word of Portuguese. Wow. Quite an inner city type school. Quite rough around the edges, no green space, and sink or swim. And they swam. They all swim, and they've been amazing. Especially the youngest has a real gift for languages. He just speaks like a local now. His older brother is doing really well at school. He's come top of this Medal of Honor. He keeps winning every year, but he sounds like me when he speaks Portuguese. But they've adapted really well. It's a really family-friendly place, right? You know this. You got kids? Yeah. Kids are welcome everywhere. They're not told to be quiet. Families do stuff together. There's this intergenerational kind of custom here where you could be in like a super fancy restaurant even with the kids, and like no one even batters an eyelid. I remember we went to quite a nice restaurant near where we live, which is like this meat restaurant, and we had our baby boy, and he was a bit fidgety and a bit grumpy, and he was getting tired, and he started to cry a little bit, and we thought, okay, this is disrupting people's meals. And the waitress comes over and she says, okay, I'll pick him up, and she picked him up and she kind of carried him around the restaurant, and he calmed down. It was they love kids here. It's a really family oriented culture. I was speaking today actually to an American client of mine, and he was saying that if you speak to you look at the history of Portugal and the way that Portuguese people think about it, they talk about still today Portugal as a port. People come in and come out, and there is this almost this attitude of, well, you're coming in and that's okay, and you're welcome here, and that's quite a nice. You see that in the culture, I suppose. Yeah. No, they're very. We've seen a lot of Brazilians that have arrived since we've been here because of the dynamic that's happening in Brazil, and genuine refugees as well. Portugal are open to Syrians and others have arrived. I'm talking just about the school dynamic that I've seen. But most are rooted in Portugal, most are rooted in Porto, most often their own parents have gone to the same school. So there's that longevity as well that exists, and a sense of kind of inherited community as well.
Yeah. And whereabouts are you originally from, Oliver, in the UK?
I'm from Essex, which is near London, which has certain resonances for those that know the country.
The only way is Essex.
Yeah, the only way is Essex. Exactly. Yes, so I'm from there, but I haven't lived there for 25 years. But my parents still live there, so I go back.
Are you? Did I see correctly? You're a Manchester City.
No. I inherited Tottenham as my team.
Oh, you inherited Tottenham.
Yeah,
okay.
So we don't have too many worries about, championship playoffs or anything. Although they did get to Champions League final a couple of years ago.
And you had a Portuguese manager for a little while.
We did for a little while. Where's he gone now?
He's gone. Yeah, he's gone to Roma.
He's gone to Roma, hasn't he?
Yeah. Okay, interesting. Maybe you can just tell us about some of the work that you're doing. You're quite a busy guy, books and travel articles and publications and stuff, but maybe you can just tell us about some of your work that you've done. Go for it.
Yeah, sure. So I identify primarily as a journalist. That's been what I've been doing for the last 20 years. I've always been independent, which gives me not much security, but lots of flexibility. So I'm always determined to use my flexibility. I had in South America, I was working as more like a news correspondent. I don't do so much news stuff anymore. Part of my work is travel articles. Part of it's book reviews, but my main, 85% of what I do is around social environmental issues, often through a business lens. So that's my speciality on sustainability. And I write mostly for UK publications on that issue. And then on the side, I write, I don't want to call them travel logs because that sounds like they're guides or something. I write non-fiction reportage. So I did a book on South America when Chavez in Venezuela was doing his thing, and the whole continent was turning left. I'd spent a year traveling around on buses around the whole continent, trying to get stories from the floor, from the ground, to explain that macro political swing to the left. What were the frustrations? What were the hopes that people were expressing in a battered women's home in Chile, or in a small Pentecostal church in a slum in Lima. So that's what I did. And I did a similar book on India, traveling around India, doing this, trying to understand how the opening up of India was not just changing the economy, but changing people's cultural attitudes and the tensions that came from that. And then I moved to Wales, and I did a travel book without traveling, I call it, where I asked the question whether you could belong in a place where you don't belong. So they're actually quite germane to our conversation today, looking at rural Britain and what community looks like these days in the UK, and whether you can settle in a place and feel like it's home. So that's a question. It's a question you're asking. It's a question that's preoccupied me a long time. And then at the moment, I'm working on a new book about the Amazonia, and it's slightly different from reportage. It's like a historical chronology, trying to explain what's happened in the Amazon over all these years to get us to where we are today. So I was in Brazil for 3 months, in Manaus of all places, at the beginning of the year during the COVID outbreak, the second wave there, which was an experience in itself. Not much opportunity to get out and do research, but it was an experience to be there. And Portugal has facilitated that. I've done my best to learn the language whilst I've been here, and there's lots of cultural reference points with South America and with Brazil in particular.
Yeah, it's. I read a stat, or it's been spoken about before on the podcast as well, that Portugal has been or has representation in every continent in the world. They've been, and they've, you've got Macau, and you've got Brazil, and you've got in Africa. It's incredible that this tiny country had this reach, which had good and bad parts to it, of course. But maybe just in terms of your, the stuff that you've been doing in South America with this political swing to the left. I mean, what do you see here when you compare sort of the things that have happened there from a cultural level and some of the challenges that those people face? I was thinking maybe you'd had a good perspective on what you see here in terms of, it's quite well documented Portugal's third or fourth most peaceful country in the world. It seems relatively stable here from what we can see. I mean, what is your perspective on what you've seen from a cultural, political sort of situation in Portugal in the time that you've been here?
So my observations are fairly generic. I don't follow I don't write on the political issues affecting the country. I live here, so it's more as a sort of citizen rather than as a journalist that I'd comment. But you're right, it does feel stable. It does feel quite progressive on social issues. Curiosity, really, because culturally it's still quite conservative. The legislation is quite progressive on things like abortion and what have you, and gay rights. And so I think that's all good. I remember seeing there's an index about the best place to bring up your kids, actually. I've forgotten what it's called. Kids, forget, but Portugal's on top of that. And that's not just safety on the streets, but level of education, kind of social cohesion. I think the thing I love best about Portugal, from in terms of demographics and politics, is that it feels quite an equal sort of place. It's not brimming with money. You have some rich, but most are getting by or struggling to get by. The minimum wage really is pretty pitiful, and lots of people live on that, and it must be hard, it must be difficult, but you kind of know that you're in it with everyone else. There's not this them and us feeling here. And actually recently been seeing lots of cases of corruption in the political system and in some of the big banks, and I think that's healthy for the country. I think that does break even further down this them and us feeling. There was a bit of cynicism because of this history of political corruption in the recent decades. But I think there's some positive, and they feel like at last they're being held to account. People are finding themselves up in front of judges, and not just, these things tended to get kicked into the long grass. And now we're seeing a slew of these cases. And I think that's healthy for the country. And sort of, it's very European. It buys into the European ideal. It takes its, it follows the European process in the kind of the wider sense of solidarity with other countries. And I mean, you do feel it's a bit of a minnow in Europe, which is funny given that, its colonial past and its importance culturally around the world. You do sense, I used to live in Wales, and the dynamic between Wales and England feels a bit like Portugal and Spain. When the Portuguese all speak like 4 languages, make every effort to speak Spanish or English when people come. Spanish, they couldn't care less. They come in, they just speak Spanish, expect to be understood, a bit like the English when they're in Wales. And so there is this sense of like, yeah, we're European and we need to be European because, we are a tiny country with 12 million people or whatever. And to compete and to get by, we need to buy into the project. And it's done them well. It's served them well. The country now has good infrastructure. As you said, it's a peaceful, safe kind of environment. I think public services are all pretty good, and that shows again for a socialist government that invests in these things. Sure, the education system could be better, but it's solid. I'm happy to send my kids to public school here, no problem. The health system, I haven't had much occasion to use it, and it's obviously overstretched with COVID, but it's good. You can walk through the door, you don't have to pay, and so you could come here and do everything private. If you wanted to send your kids to private school, have private health insurance. And I know a lot of foreigners that move just for the safety, just for the security, that they do that. You don't have to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm living here now. One of the things that I've noticed, and you probably noticed the same, having made Portuguese friends, they love to complain about their medical system and the education system. But for me, of course, it can improve and there's things that can be better. But when I look at it from the outside, like an outsider coming in, I'm like, it's pretty damn good. They've got it pretty good here. What about, the one thing you mentioned there about the story that you did in Wales, what does it call? Belonging to a place that's not your home?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Do you feel like this is a home for you now? And if so, what makes you feel like you belong here? What makes you feel welcome?
Yeah. So I think there's my very sort of basic observations from asking this question in Wales. There's 2 sides to the question. There's like, do you want to belong, and are you making an effort to do so? And does the place want you to belong? And will it open the doors to you? And the answer to the second one is definitely yes. Portuguese, they take a while to get to know. They are quite tied up in family. But if you can break through, and it's a wonderful place to be, and they're solid friends. We haven't made loads of friends. We're not part of a big social circuit, but the friends that we have made are generous and kind and patient. All those things you need when you rock up in a place, right? You don't know anyone, and quite cosmopolitan as well. Even though we're a second city, everyone, as I say, speaks another language. Everyone, under 40. And many over as well. So it's easy to get in, and they're happy to welcome you. It's the question whether you sort of want to make the effort, because you'll only get as much out of the place as you put in, is my feeling. And there's two options: that you can join the British club in Portugal and play cricket, and then you'll have a wonderful time, but you probably, and send your kids to British school, and invite your friends over from London for long weekends, and that can be your life here, and that's possible. It's not a life we've chosen, but I know that other people do, and they enjoy that. But I'm much more interested in trying to put down roots and get to know what it is to live in this place as a local. And so I've made language is essential, and that is not as accessible as Spanish by any means, but it does give you a sort of way in. But we've tried hard at it, and it is doable. Actually, the thing you've probably found the same is actually trying to speak Portuguese and not have people respond to you in English and try and help you out, especially initially. That's one of the challenges. The other challenge is to, as I say, to find links into the community that differentiate from the tourists, which is a big part of the economy, and they're everywhere, whether they're not English or Dutch or French or Spanish. So we found sending kids to the school really helped. I'm independent, so I could work at home, but I intentionally went and found a co-working space where I am now. And it's a co-working space mostly of young Portuguese professionals. So that's a way of mixing and finding new people, new friends. It's very interesting. We're all freelancers, but everyone stops at 1 o'clock. We all have lunch together. It's another very traditional kind of Portuguese way of doing things, the sacred nature of the lunch. And then I do some volunteering as well. There's a system, it's called Casa, a charity here in Porto that serve meals to homeless people and just those on low incomes every day of the year, including Christmas Day. It's a wonderful organisation, and I approached them entirely selfishly so I could practice my Spanish and my Portuguese and, just get in the mix of it. But I think what they do is wonderful. We used to have a restaurant where people would come and sit, and you would serve them soup, main course, sobremesa, and a coffee. And it was just a really good way to get to know these people I'd never otherwise come across my path. Now, because of COVID, they can't sit down. We have to give the food at the door, but it's a great organisation. If you were to move here, to find an opportunity like that to volunteer and give some of your time, it's so rewarding. And with COVID, there's only too much need, around the corner. We've seen numbers, jump up, unfortunately, as people have lost their jobs or incomes have, just been reduced because of COVID. What we were seeing was your classic down and out, often regrettably drink related or drug related, or men in their 50s plus, and now it's all types, and people asking for their kids as well, and they can take food back. So Portugal finds itself, I think, in a difficult place. If you go look it, as I say, you can live the life of Riley here. You can have your gated home and your private school, and it will work very well for you. But to get under the skin of the place, I think you will see hard things as well. It's not bed of roses, and it's going to be difficult for the next few years.
Yeah. For your boys going to public school, sort of, learning the language, sort of jumping in. My kids also go to public school, and it's been great. How have you found that sort of enriched them and the kind of life that they have here in comparison to what they had in South America, in comparison to what they maybe would have had in the UK? How do you see see their lives here and how it enriches them.
Yeah, I'd like to think they were in a great school in Wales where we were before we moved here. A local village school, like 60 kids. Everyone knew everyone. All the parents knew each other. The teachers delightful. But to be honest, that's not the world that they're going to grow up in. That's not preparing them for a global, the global labour market, or for the kind of political challenges that we're going to be facing. It's a very pleasant idyll for your early years, and I think they got taught good values and blah blah blah. But here, and this is true for anywhere they would have gone, they've just been forced to see a different reality. To see how other people see the world and view our country and view their country and view the world is very different. So that's enriched them. I think they've managed to retain relationships at home as well as having ones here. So I think they've gained rather than lost. And you say they haven't swapped. They've sort of augmented their social network. And yeah, I think it's more of a mindset thing. They just inevitably will see the world as a bigger place with more opportunities. We always joke that they're going to become accountants in sort of South London suburb somewhere and never move again. But if that's what they choose, then great. But I think moving to a place like Portugal, it's safe, it's not disruptive. I'm happy for them to go to school by themselves in a way I wouldn't be in Argentina or Brazil, for example. Mm-hmm. They feel Porto's just that bit smaller, not quite a bit smaller than Lisbon. So again, I feel comfortable with them getting on them. Then they're 12 and 13, getting on the metro by themselves, going to the shops by themselves. In a way I wouldn't feel in London, I don't think, at that age. You wouldn't be responsible to let them travel around the city. And they feel like they own it. They've got their buddies that they can go and catch up with. There's there's lots of opportunities for family activities. Like there's increasingly good ecovias, cycle paths around the cities. And here we've got good access to the coast. So we've got a metro that runs outside our house, literally opposite the house. And it takes us 20 kilometers up the coast. So we can jump on there with our bikes and we're on the coast in 30 minutes, 40 minutes. And you've got a lovely 3-hour cycle ride on these ecovias, on the dunes, going through little fishing villages. And that's next to a big city. So it's terrific for them, I think. And they've just got into surfing. So again, they get on the metro, 15 minutes at the sea, and they can join a surfing lesson and go to trampoline park, which they love. My eldest is going to one of these workshop type after school clubs where they learn how to program and make stuff. He loves that. So it's got a bit of everything. And I think the school has grounded them and given them a kind of a good base to blossom from. Obviously they're different. And that's something that I think anyone moving here will have to recognize. However good their Portuguese is, they've got blue eyes. No one has blue eyes in the school. Even silly little things like that. Their cultural references, what they've seen on the TV and stuff, is slightly different. So they're constantly feeling a bit odd one out. But I don't think that's a bad thing either. I think you learn from that experience as well.
Yeah, interesting. And for you, Oliver, in terms of living here, you mentioned the workspace. You mentioned being in a sort of a more Portuguese neighborhood. How does being in this place give you the room and the inspiration to write and to write these pieces that you write, or at least give you the space to think and to do what you do?
So I think there's again two sides to it. One is having something to write about. And the other is having the sort of mechanisms to do it, the space to do it. And I'll confess, most of my focus is international. It's elsewhere. At this moment, my brain's at half in the Amazon. But there is really interesting stuff to write about here in Portugal. It's continually fascinating. I'm especially intrigued by the interior of the country, which feels like untouched, more or less. The press trips I've done, and just our own travels, the ones I've enjoyed most are to the centre of the country and to the north of the country, where you find these idyllic but empty villages and nature nature areas, nature, they call them reservas, or they're not parks. They're not officially parks. So Serra da Estrela, I'm a big fan of, right in the middle of the town. I think it's just the most beautiful place. You've got these castles that go back, about hundreds of years. And Gervais, obviously, a national park in the north, which we really like going to. It's about an hour and a half from Porto. And then I discovered this other area called Serra da Freita, which is about 40 minutes away. And it's just amazing. Again, abandoned villages, and they've got these cool walkways now, and a long suspension bridge, and you can go rafting, and you can go cycling. And so there's lots to write about. Culturally, the sort of stuff like, so that's the travel writing, where to go. I mean, there's endless things. And the social, I'm really interested in this kind of retention of cultural identity. How do you develop cities like Lisbon and Porto, which are quite international, quite cosmopolitan, yet retain very much a sense of self? How do they keep that going, especially in the countryside? It can be 17th century in some of these villages. It feels like that, which is lovely in a way. You feel like you're going to lose it. So the one story I'm desperate to do is of the last few shepherds in Serra da Estrela in the centre of the country. So there's about a dozen, and I went to meet a couple, and they live up in the hills. They sleep out during the summer. It's extraordinary, and they go up like they did hundreds of years ago, go up into the meadows in the summer and then come down, and that will probably be gone. So I want to capture that before it does. And then space to write. I think one of the advantages of moving to a new place is that you kind of start from scratch. So slightly selfish, but all those obligations you have to family and friends, and or we've got this thing this weekend, and suddenly find your diary is completely empty, and you can choose to fill it if you will. But if you, like me, I want to concentrate on writing, because I'm freed up, and I can, I've got this great workspace in the middle of town. I can carve out that time and go and do it.
Brilliant. You're a runner as well. I follow you on Instagram, and I see you've run in Comporta and all up and down the coastline. I mean, how about this place for a destination for running and trail running and things like that?
Trail running is my passion, and it's pretty good. I mean, cycling comes first. So a lot of the routes you end up running, they've been designed for cyclists first, or for walkers. So you've got, I'm doing the Camino de Santiago at the moment, the Spanish version, from the French border to Santiago de Compostela. I'm doing it with a friend. We run for 3 days, about 150k, and then we go home. And so we've done 4 lots, and we're about to finish it. But you can do that same walk from areas around Portugal, and especially the interior. They're really hot on these sign trails. They tend to be walking trails, anywhere between 3 or 4 kilometers and 15, 20 kilometers, because they realize that's an attraction. You go and visit a town, you have a look at the castle, and then you go for an afternoon walk. So that's all quite well organized. And it's quite hard to find footpaths sometimes. I lucked out. I found a guy who owns our favorite bar, Candelabro, which you must go to if you go to Porto. He's a runner as well. He was a runner, so it's back. And he showed me all around the city. And there's loads of little paths you can get to know, like the old city and off the track. But then just running along the river, it's beautiful here as well, the river, and then you're out to the coast. Well, I've had some good running trips. I went to Serra da Estrela. I took the bus down one morning, ran up into the mountains, stayed there, ran down the other side, and caught the bus back to Porto the second day. We did the similar thing in Madeira. We went to with a friend. We flew to Madeira, got a taxi from the airport, started running, ran for 10 hours, got to, slept under a tree, and then carried on the next day, got to the beach, had a swim, got in a taxi, went to the airport. And there's these ultra races. I'm not a big racer, but I like running kind of fairly long distances, but not in a competitive setting. But you can steal their routes that they do, and you can often just copy those on the GPX. So it's a great place. It's got a good mix, of terrains, the coast, the interior, the mountains, and then the south. Different landscapes everywhere, which is good. It keeps it refreshed, interesting.
Yeah. I also saw that you did a piece about some of the best restaurants to eat out in Porto. Okay, so I mean, at the risk of offending some of your friends in Porto, what do you really think about Francesinha? Do you like it or not?
And look, I'm happy to confess, I've never eaten one. Look at that! Look at shock. Yeah,
really?
Not even for journalistic purposes. No, it looks like a heart attack on a plate. So I haven't tried it. I really should. I should just take a bite, and give it a go. But it's this, obviously, for those that don't know, a local speciality, and it's covered in cheesy sauce and all sorts of meats. It's super heavy. A lot of the food is quite heavy. I find they like, especially in the interior, like heavy stew in the north, heavy stews and strong meats that need strong wine to go with them, and cod obviously everywhere. The food, there's some great restaurants. I mean, Lisbon obviously is the best place for restaurants, but I mean, Comporta, where I was, which is not so far from Lisbon, fair enough. They have amazing restaurants there. It's a sort of gastro place to go to. And it'd be interesting to go actually and have a look how many are still open, because with COVID, a number of the restaurants are closed. Good ones tend to stay open. We've got a couple of Michelin stars here in the city, and then others dotted around not so far away. And it's cheap, compared to London or to New York. It's 20% of the cost to have a really good meal. And you can eat well. If you like abundante food, you don't ever leave hungry.
No, they're super scared that you will leave hungry. They start asking you want any more. It's crazy. My wife is Portuguese, and her biggest fear is that people leave our house hungry. And I'm like, that's never going to happen. If you see me and our kids, nobody's hungry in our house. So yeah, Oliver, where are some of the other places in the country that you'd like to visit and explore?
I don't really know the south at all, so I am interested in getting to know Algarve, away from the sort of the really popular hubs. I think it's it only takes half an hour outside Faro to begin to see. Again, there's kind of, as was referenced before, really authentic kind of traditional Portuguese way of living, and same for Alentejo. I love the Minho area in the north, the border with Spain. We've spent a few great trips up there to Moledo and Caminha and places like that. It's just beautiful and really quiet. I went up to Trás-os-Montes in the north again. Just a beautiful kind of empty space that it kind of demands more attention than I could give it then. I did the EN2, which I would recommend anyone to do. That's a great way to get a flavour of the interior of the country. The EN2, the Estrada Nacional Número 2, it runs, it's an old road, the old highway that runs right from the north, a place called Chaves, right through the centre of the country, missing out all the new highways down to Faro in the south. And I took a week doing it with my dad. We rented one of these camper vans and stopped off at little villages on the way and some big cities as well. It was a brilliant way just to get that you're in Trás-os-Montes, and then you get into the Douro Valley with all these kind of wiggly roads through the valleys, and then basically when you hit the Rio Tejo down, it all straight through olive trees, olive plantations, and the fruit trees, and it's getting hotter and hotter as you go, and the landscape's changing. So that's if you're feeling like you want to get a sense of Portugal, you could drive up the coast, seeing the big cities, and then come back on this EN2 road. It'd take you 2 weeks, and you'd feel you knew the country. You'd basically be oriented and get a good flavour of what it's all about.
Yeah, definitely. And there's some really beautiful villages along that road that you wouldn't know existed if you took the motorway. So it's considered Portugal's Route 66. It dissects the country. It's amazing. Oliver, one thing that you want people to remember and take away from our conversation?
So I think what I'd say is let Portugal surprise you. Be open to it presenting things you weren't expecting. And I mean that not in the sort of, it's not a place of great drama, I don't think. I don't think you're going to, maybe that's just me, I'm just sort of like non-dramatic. Maybe it does have lots of drama. But I feel it's got lots of quiet secrets that if you dig around and listen and take your time and talk to people and go off the beaten track, then it's just, there's an infinite range of possibilities that will go beyond the kind of travel article that I normally do, you know, where most people go. So that I think at Porto, once you've had 2 days exploring the historical centre, spend some time just getting on the metro and getting off where you find yourself. And I think if you're open to that, Portugal has heaps to offer.
Yeah, I quite like that. No drama. It's the most boring country in the world to watch the news because there's just like nothing. There's like nothing happening. I remember once watching the news and they had a whole story for like 30 minutes about how they've experimented with new flavors of, you know, the bolo de bolinho, that donut that they serve on the beach. And people were unsure about if they should be using the new flavors or not. And that's on the news. And you're like, come on. You know
That's probably why I don't like news reporting anyway, but there wouldn't be anything. You'd be struggling to find stuff to do. They cover Portugal from Spain. Most, you know, the New York Times or the London Times, they'll have a correspondent in Madrid who occasionally, you know, something happens in Lisbon, they demand gets on the train and comes across.
Well, Oliver, how can people follow you online? Keep in touch with your work, follow your runs, all that kind of thing.
Well, I have a sort of quite an odd surname, Balch, B-A-L-C-H. So I'm on Instagram and Twitter. I'm the only Oliver Balch, I think, that's around. LinkedIn, I tend to post sort of more worky things. Instagram's running. Twitter is, you know, articles I've found interesting. So that I've got a website. It's not updated very often. oliverbalch.com. And do get in touch. You know, I bet if you're thinking about coming, or especially if you're thinking about coming to Porto, even if I'm just a recce, then by all means, you know, get in touch. I'm happy to help out. I did the travel guide for the Telegraph newspaper, so you know that will give you what to do in 48 hours and what restaurants and hotels and all that sort of baloney. If you want sort of slightly more nuanced question, by all means, get in touch.
Okay, we'll pop some links in the show notes, and people can follow and get in touch with you. Thank you. A question, Oliver, that we ask all of our guests: Portugal, the simple life. Why?
So I think the thing that hits me most is social fabric. You know, this is a place where family is still central, where communities know each other, where neighbors help each other. And coming from a big city where I lived on a road and didn't know half my neighbours, that's really valuable. You don't know how valuable it is until you find it, and I think Portugal has that, and it's really special. And I hope it keeps it. You know, so yeah, the social fabric of the place, and it is open to you if you want to. If you want to get involved, if you want to have a local cafe, if you want to have the restaurateur down the road, remember your name, bring your favourite order. It's possible. It's there.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Oliver. I've loved this chat. If you ever make your way up to, or actually from where you are down to the Silver Coast, let me know, and we can. I'm not going to go running with you because you run too far, but we can grab a bite to eat or something, and it'll be good to meet you in person. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been great. That's a wrap.
So thank you once again to Oliver, and thank you to all of you for listening. Please subscribe, share with your friends, give us a thumbs up, and please leave a comment or a review. We'd love to hear from you. And as we say in Portugal, um abraço. Welcome to the simple life.